So good evening, everybody. Well, it's indeed a moment of great pleasure and privilege for me to welcome you all for this very special session, which has been curated by FICCI Arise. It's a great honor and privilege to have Mr. Sandeep Dutt, author of uh, My Good School, with us. And to initiate the session, we have with us Mr. Shishir Jaipuria, who is the co-chairman of FICCI Arise, and I'll request him to deliver these welcome remarks. But just before I hand it over to him, just a couple of lines about him. And though he doesn't need any introduction, but I'll just read a few lines about him. Mr. Jaipuria is the chairman of Seth Anandram Jaipuria Education Society that runs a large number of educational institutions in the space of preschool, K-12, and higher education. He is also the chairman and managing director of Guinea Filaments Limited, a leading producer of yarn, fabric, garment, and technical textiles. Mr. Jaipuria has been an active member of FICCI Executive Committee and a mentor to our initiatives in the space of education. As I mentioned, he is currently the co-chair of FICCI Arise. Over to you, sir.
A very good evening to one and all. I welcome everybody at the FICCI Arise Fireside Chat on the book My Good School. We are delighted to have with us today Mr. Sandeep Dutt, the very author of this book, who would be sharing his rich experience and insights on the making of a good school. Sandeep is a school coach, runner, mountaineer, and school and social entrepreneur. His work for the International Award for Young People has been widely acknowledged all over the world. He is also the founder of the Learning Forward India. With over 30 years of experience, he has empowered thousands of teachers and touched the lives of a near million children. We also have with us today Mr. Dilip Chenoy, Secretary General FICCI. Before joining FICCI, Dilip served as Managing Director and CEO of the National Skill Development Corporation, NSDC. Currently, he is on the Board of Governors of IILM, New Delhi, a business school, as well as on the Board of Studies of All India Management Association. Besides serving as the Director General of ICC India and of the Indian Council of Arbitration, he advises startups, including organizations in the space of digital, education, skill development, and livelihood. Friends, Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry has been very active for over a decade in the education space, namely higher education, vocational training, and school education, and is the first non-governmental organization to suggest research-based policy reforms to the government. Recognizing the significant role of the private unaided K-12 schools in shaping India's primary secondary education, FICCI Arise, which stands for the Alliance for Reimagining School Education, has been active for over 4 years. The primary focus of this alliance is policy advocacy, defining norms for standards and transparency, advocating 21st century readiness, and facilitating capacity building. Our motto at FICCI Arise is student first, and no child is left behind. One of our main objectives is to be a catalyst in the public-private effort and to engage meaningfully with regulators and policymakers, both at the central and state government level. Our aim is to build a platform for bringing together stakeholders from across the country and strive for a collective action with the realm of school education. With the exponential growth in technology and the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, the future of work is rapidly changing. Educators will have to constantly engage in realigning the education system to meet the needs of the changing demands. The school management, along with the teachers, have to understand the purpose of education, be passionate, as well as appreciate that each child has to be given personalized learning. Students have to experience the joy of learning and they should be encouraged for being lifelong learners and exposed to 21st century skills like creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, etc. It is imperative that the students are adept in interpersonal skills, namely leadership, social influence, emotional independence, as well as they are digitally literate. I am sure that this book, My Good School, had addressed all these issues that gives parents an opportunity to navigate through various types of schools and find the best that suits their child. With this, I congratulate Mr. Sandeep Dutt on his great piece of work. I now request Dilip to share his valuable views and inputs and insights and have and carry the forward discussion. Thank you, Dilip. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Jaipuria, for the welcome remarks, and welcome, Sandeep Dutt, to this interaction on your book, The Good School. I think it's a very timely book because we have the recently announced national or new education policy of 2020, which looks at creating a totally different environment for education going forward. And at this point of time, all of us in the country actually who are involved in this space are working at taking the policy into execution and having an execution roadmap. I believe that your book, My Good School, and I think it is very aptly described as a book for anyone and everyone associated with schools and schooling. For parents, you actually have a whole section on how to select a school in cities like Delhi, where it's literally a lottery system. It may not be applicable, but I'm sure in many parts of the country, this would be applicable. Been quite fascinated with much of what you have written. I've had the opportunity of actually reading the book before this conversation. Needless to say that your core thing is that buildings don't make institutions. It's more than that. I don't know, Mr. Jaipuri, if you had read the book, you might have not taken to heart his particular comment that when people have money, they say we want to build a school, and they end up building it, and then he actually talks in his book that that's not what a school is all about. And therefore, I'm going to go through a kind of a chat with him to say what the school is all about. So, the book, as we will hear, and as Mr. Jaipuria introduced him, a school coach, bookseller, runner, mountaineer, social entrepreneur, over 30 years of experience. I've had the good fortune of knowing him prior to FICCI also. And in fact, even visiting home and having a good cup of tea with him. So it's good to have you on this platform. And in the interest of time, I would quickly go into the questions. But before we go into the discussion, Sandeep, if there's anything you would like to share before the discussions, may I invite you for a brief remarks, and then we'll jump into the Q&A session.
Thank you, Jaipuria sir. Thank you, Dilip. Thank you, everyone at FICCI. And what you actually talk about in FICCI Arise is perhaps what My Good School is about. And we talk of aligning and reimagining stakeholders. That's what makes a school. A school is nothing. It's just a relationship between stakeholders. And whole focus of the book and our writing is not on infra. When I talk of bricks and models, like Dilip categorically said, I'm not against that you shouldn't construct a school, but school has to have a heart and a soul. And that heart and a soul only comes with the relationship of stakeholders. So My Good School is basically a relationship with teachers at the epicenter and teachers building bonds with students, with parents, and the management. So if we have stronger relationships, we'll have a better school. What is a school? School is a space where you move from your personal self to a social self. And who helps you transition? Your teachers. So it's as simple as that. If we can keep it as simple, we will be able to spread the joy of learning. And that's what my good school is about, Dilip.
So I presume now you want to go into a Q&A session. So taking off from where you left, and I was quite fascinated by your teacher's story. You devote a lot of, I think 3 sections in your book, and many different times in your book, you talk about teachers. And in one of your chapters, teachers travel with you all your life. You have actually written learning is a lifelong process, which you just now mentioned, and it is vital that we have the best teacher accompany us on our journey of life, right? What, according to you, right? And how do you actually talk about what makes a great teacher? And what is it? And you talk about that you feel that needs to be done to give them the due respect and recognition that they deserve as contributors to nation building. I had a vice principal in our school, Mr. N.R.K. Murthy, who used to say that teachers are valued but are paid less, and we take less because we don't want to monetize our profession, right? That was his view, and this was in the 70s, early 70s. So what is it that you feel can be done to actually take this model that you built, let's say in Bali in Rajasthan, and universalize it?
Yeah, it's very simple. Teachers perhaps are lifelong learners, and after teachers, students follow them as lifelong learners. So I'm of a firm belief that schooling is for life. So I say it every day, if you say I passed out of school, you'd never pass out of school. At the behest of repeating this, you pass out only once in life. So you have to be a lifelong learner, and that's what a teacher essentially is. So teachers' happiness lies in sharing the joy of learning. And that happens when the teachers experience reading, writing, and research throughout their lives. So when we work with teachers very extensively, our focus is on teachers doing the reading, writing, and research, with then the children follow. You so rightfully said that teaching is perhaps the most undervalued profession in the world. But let us not forget, there is a teacher in the mother, there's a teacher in the father, there's a teacher in the peers also. So it's not really fair sometimes when we only look at the transacting teacher as a processor of learning. The learning happens from all around. It happens with all the stakeholders. So when we are talking of teacher, we are actually talking of all the people around you. That's exactly what we are saying, that a child has to learn in the experiential mode. So a child will learn with everyone around in the ecosystem. And normally our definition of a teacher restricts the learning cycle. So that's where we need to figure out how we can improve the learning cycle by actually helping the child connect with all the stakeholders. And that's exactly why we talk of my good school as a child learning from the teacher, from the parent, from the management, and from everyone around. And that's where the school happens. Dilip, you so beautifully said that this perhaps happens more in a residential school. So what we've really done this time around, we have taken a day school and translated the positive elements of a residential school to be used in a day school. And that's exactly what you find when you travel all over the world. You go to Finland, you go to America, you go to Singapore. I practically traveled to schools across the world, and I found 2 things common across the world. One, the happiness of teachers does not just lie in a transaction of payment to the teachers. And second, children learn from everyone around them. So when you look at these 2 things which are universal, they help you answer so many of those questions you asked me. Over to you, Dilip.
Take that one step further, and I like your idea of a residential come boarding school, because the school that I went to had a residential component, but we also had a boarding component. But the things were common, and I want to take you back to your 4 S's that you mentioned. Service, sport. The 4 S's. I'll ask you to expand on them. But how do you actually believe that it's important, and how can we take that in areas where there is no infrastructure? You talked about replicating this. For example, in NSDC, we had Saumil from Bangalore actually converting a small internal classroom into a sporting arena. So how do you think that we should actually extend this concept of 4 S's to schools? And second, related to your earlier question on teachers, sorry, I'm asking you too. You actually you talk about the parents having a greater role also, not only the teacher being the teacher for the student. So first, if you can just say that what do parents need to do to facilitate the teacher at home, and second, come to the 4 S's.
Thank you, Dilip. I'm glad you started talking about the 4 S's, because if you look at this very simply, you know what happens sometimes in a jargonistic era of schools and pedagogy and all kinds of things we read about, we forget the basics. Why does a child go to school? And what does the child do the first thing when the child goes to school? The first thing a child does, a child learns how to give. You move from your personal space to your social space. In your personal space, your parents and your small community gives you everything you want. But the first thing you learn when you go to school is you share your pencil, you share your rubber, you share your tiffin box. That's the first thing you learn. So first thing, learning, giving is service. Then when you grow up in school, you also get skills. You learn art, you need music, and that's the whole idea of picking up skills. Yes, the school also helps you become fit. You so rightfully mentioned that in a classroom, you can actually have skills. And last but not the least, you also study. You know, referring to a very interesting thing when you mentioned about NSDC, what struck me, the first sector skill council in the world NSDC should have made, they should have made a teacher sector skill council. We just got into making so many skill councils and using skilling as India's forte. But we forgot that perhaps we need to look at the sector skill council for skilling, which I'm glad to a large extent is today addressed in the new education policy, because only when teachers' skill improve, things will happen. Now, regarding parents, you know, parents are your first teachers, parents are your last teachers. First, a child emulates a parent. You know, the other day, a parent asked me that a child is always on the mobile phone. I said, I'm not going to tell you to take the mobile phone away. I'm simply going to say is have patience first. Second, I'm going to recommend one very simple thing to you. Please look into the mirror and answer, whom is the child emulating? So a child learns more through emulation than by design. And this emulation is the key for every parent to understand. So, you know, parents, today's children are lacking role models. Today's youngsters are lacking mentors. So if you look at the cycle of learning, it is hamstrung by teaching on one hand and mentorship on the other hand. If we can address these two at the personal level and the social level, we will be able to address the quality of schooling in a large way. Yeah, yes, Dilip.
Thank you for that. Now let's get into since most of the FICCI Arise members, including Mr. Jaipuria, are leaders, right? How do leaders of schools actually impact the journey or destiny of a school? You yourself have been the chairman and yourself have been a leader in the school. What would be your message to leaders? In fact, in one case, you defined a very nice way of defining the principle. So I'll be very grateful if you can share that with the listeners here. But what is it in terms of leadership that you would suggest that people who have the money to build the building and employ the people actually turn out to be a good school?
Yeah, fantastic. I was waiting for this question. You know, you actually don't need infrastructure to build learning. And we have established in the last 10 years, we have perhaps gone to everywhere in the world where we have said that your learning forward does not require any kind of formal structured workshop and coaching methodology. So learning forward essentially has to be a curriculum which is tailor-made for a unique situation. Now, very interesting thing, when I meet people from across the world and with good members of FICCI who are doing very good work, what I find, whether the members of FICCI or at the government school or at a private school, what makes a difference is the curriculum the school adopts. And so often, every time I have to explain that curriculum is not CBSE. Curriculum is not your affiliation or the assessment body you're connected with. Curriculum is the how you make for the child. Curriculum is what the child follows when the learning cycle happens in the school. Curriculum has to be tailor-made. So my good school really categorically says that every child's experience in life is absolutely unique. No two children have the same school experience. Now, if I was to look back at my school experience or your school experience, we may find in common is what? One, a happy teacher who's held our hand. Second, what we did outside the classroom, which we enjoyed. So if you look at happy teachers and if you look at your good school, it's experience that you carry forward. You don't carry forward your content. And to make a great experience, your teacher largely plays the role as the catalyst. And as the teacher holds your hand through situations, you improve. Over to you, Dilip.
I want you to explain that a bit more, because in your book, you very in one place you very clearly put the different types of school certification boards, and you distinguish between curriculum and the board, right? And said what they offer and how a parent could use it as a guide to place the student. But now you introduced a new element about the curriculum, right? So how do you suggest that schools and teachers and leaders of schools balance the need to complete, let's say, the course between a certain time, and to focus on curriculum, especially if it's a curtailed school time? So, how do you actually enable that to happen?
Yeah, beautiful. So I will give you an example of a school where we have actually made this live. So when we say this way, in a school, what we saw that every child is a 10 on 10. So every child is a complete child. That's the first thing. Some children may be good in service, some may be good in skills, some may be good in sport, and yes, some will also study. So school has to actually offer enough of clubs, societies, and options for a child to participate in. If you look at the last 30 years, a large number of things which boarding schools used to do are now being done in day schools, and school days in schools are getting longer. So what we recommend how to structure it, which we have done in at least a few dozen schools we have worked with, one day in the week, we call it a no bag day. Some state governments are also now trying to do that, where children come on a Saturday to a school and they do only service, skill, and sport. So what this does is that on the other 5 days, the focus may not be on these S's, but on that one day when the focus is on one of the S's of the child, which the child really likes, it makes all the difference to the child's life. Child has that one day in the week to look forward to, and that carries the child happily throughout the week. And when the child is happy, the child will participate better in the academic cycle and help you catch up with the syllabus. Yes, a small tweak about increasing a classroom time by 5-10 minutes in a normal working day always creates more space for you for that free day in the week. But most important, you only don't need just free day for children. You also need a free day for the teachers. So what we do normally when we go to schools is we say that take out 3 to 4 days in a month. Let one day only teachers come to school and do their reading, writing, and research. And the other 2-3 days, let the children come to school and do what they really love doing. Because that's what life is all about. Once you find out what you love doing, it makes learning and the joy of learning very, very simple and easily adaptable and approachable.
Thank you. I agree with most of what you say. I only have one difference, and you need not address it here. I believe that I am a very strong believer that there should be compulsory sport every day, because fitness actually comes out, from that every day. But I'm not going to get into that discussion. That's not the real idea of this. But you talked about going back and learning. So you've talked about Tagore's philosophy in education and the strong relationship it has with society, and just now you answered the service kind of a question. Do you think in the complexities of the world in which you live in, it becomes important for learners? And I won't say only school kids, because you're defined learners, and you and me and Mr. Jaipuria, as well as everyone else in this thing, are also learners currently. Go back and learn from the great traditions to which we belong. And do you think that this lockdown has actually introduced an element that we can use a hybrid model of learning and imbibe this policy of going back to learn?
Yeah, I respect what you're saying. But before I go deeper into it, I still have part of my last question, which I need to answer, where we refer to the principal as the chief learning leader. So if you like, you have CFOs and CEOs. I think it's important for us to look at the principal as the chief learning leader. And once you actually find a principal, let the principal champion learning. So that's one part. Now, coming to what you were saying, I think it's good to look at it this way, that the current times, if I may say, have been the best times for education to have a relook. For us as learners and educators to look into the mirror and say, are we doing enough? We were challenged to adapt. So that's exactly where human beings perform. So in this model, what you're calling hybrid, I don't think anything really hybrid out of it. Now, learning, if you look back historically, has moved from chalk and slate to paper and pencil to keyboard and screen. So I'm not sure whether these tools make learning hybrid or inbred or e-bred, but what really these tools help, they help you connect. And they're only a wire media between your quest for learning and the methodology which is around for you to adapt. I fully appreciate the last 1 year. Why? Because teachers perhaps got more time to think because they were freed from the normal school timetable. They had the option to do things beyond the timetable. And that's exactly where they realized the value of experiential learning. That's the way I look at the current times. And if you look back in history, when you go back, you talk of the Gutenberg, where the press was invented. Mark my words, in the next 50 years, 220 will be remembered as to bringing education and health to the core in the world. So if you look at the last 1 year, the companies and the entrepreneurs who have done well, we have so many with us, have been the ones who have actually been working with health and who are now improvising to build education learning models. So even if you look at all the startup ecosystem today, it's largely focused on health and education. And that's the time we are in. Over to you, Dilip.
I think that's very interesting. But, in another context, discussion that I was having in the, classroom education was described as over the top. So mostly you were addressing, you were rushing to complete, let's say, the course, because you define curriculum differently, the course, and you did not understand the different people. And in your book, you talked about the teacher needing to understand the learning ability of different, people in their class, and also talked about how to address some other issues there. But if it is being said that over the top, don't you think that in this digital world where you are doing online classrooms, actually afford a learner and a parent to revisit the class? You see, earlier, this was not possible. If you missed a class, you had to actually use someone else's notes, right? Or if you, if you didn't understand, you couldn't go back and really ask the teacher. Although some schools have developed, WhatsApp group or some email things to ask questions. But don't you think that some of what has actually happened in 220, as you have put this 2020 as, could be mainstreamed and really lead to advances in the whole education system?
Yeah, what you're saying is very right, Dilip. And I sometimes get carried away on saying that we have arrived. So that's not fair, though. And for the sake of taking learning forward, I think there was no better time than this. And yes, I agree with you that a lot of best practices and a lot of tools which are now we are being forced to use will perhaps become part of our life. Screen and keyboard will be here with us for the next, I would safely say, 20 years. Yes, you will say that voice is coming in. I agree to an extent, but voice will still take longer time than we can think at this stage. And these tools will definitely help. I agree with you that we can actually recap a lesson on a podcast. We can recap a lesson on a video. We can actually use a lot of the education digital softwares today. I'm quite sure that as we go ahead in the next 2-3 years and with the current vision of a digital India, I think leaving the financial sector where we are focused in the last 20 years, the next 10 years, we will have to by force work in the education space, because we have kind of saturated the innovations in the financial space and other telecom spaces. So that's why we look at the innovations, what you're talking of, and these will grow. If I had been just 10 years behind, we were always focusing on financial sector reforms, and education sector reform never came up. So the financial sector reforms came up, the stock exchanges got automated, the whole lot of automation happened in the real industry of the country, which is the financial side as well as the medical side. Education is just about catching up, and world over, education actually comes as a laggard. But perhaps this is the time for the world to realize that if you don't have good education, you'll not have anything else. And I often get tempted to say, so that's where I agree with you totally, that these tools and how we do over the top will actually help us innovate and build things ahead.
Thank you for that. Just before I get into the next question with you, I'd like to just request if those who are viewing this and who are participating in this webinar, please post your questions in the chat box in the Q&A thing there, and then we'll put them into Sandeep as we go along. So, coming back to the way that you have actually described it in your book, right? You have talked about in your previous answer also, you talked about innovation, right? So you mentioned there that, sort of, I was reminded of Tony Blair, and I'll take that comparison here. So in the West, innovation is done in research and development, R&D departments. In innovation, it happens every corner of the street. Tony Blair only said that I don't want to, engage with India because if I give them a corner, that they'll set up a shop, right? That was his quote, which was because they're such great entrepreneurs. But you talked about innovation happening in every corner of the street. So how do you, as education and trainers, how do you think that we can actually provide an environment that creates a free mind to design and bring about, innovation, a whole innovation society? Because if one thing we were to look at it, that if the decade of 2000 to 2010 was the decade of consumption, it looks like 2020 onwards has become the, a decade of creation. Given the fact that we went digital and everybody had access to YouTube. So we had a lot of, singers, dancers, teachers, artists, everybody putting on their things on YouTube so others could learn. So how do you feel, and what do you feel about this whole thing of innovation and the role of schools and in creating an innovation and experience? You want to use word experiential is slightly different from innovation. So how do you talk about the innovation?
Yeah, what you're saying right today, if you look at the last 4-5 years, and I get tempted to mention the Atal Tinkering Labs. I get tempted to mention what you call as experiential learning is now going inside and outside the classroom. I also get tempted to mention that the world is looking at Finland. Why is India looking in Finland? Because if you go to Finland, a 3-4-year-old possibly spends most time outside the classroom than inside the classroom. So what you're saying is right, that technology is now available where we can create experiences. And more important than just creating experiences, we have to let the children experiment. So there is always this confusion between experiential learning and experimental learning. I've even tried to explain that someplace in the book. And what is very important, and if you look back to your growing up in school, or I go back to my school, where we had so much opportunity beyond the school hours to actually work on innovation and design. Now, the minute the schools have now realized that the children can actually use a maker's space, or they can use an Atal Tinkering Lab, I think innovation in school will be looked at very differently in the next 4-5 years. Yes, what is unique in this case is that the teacher should get a freer hand. Even now, a teacher does not have the free hand. The first thing a principal does in a school, give me a notebook. Aap mujhe bataye ki how will you teach this lesson in the class? No, that is where freedom collapses. Now, if you have appointed a teacher, give space to that teacher to go to the class and teach. Teachers should look at every child in the class, look at every moment in the class and use that, and not look at a notebook and say, this is what I wrote to my principal and this is what I'm supposed to finish in the next 10 minutes. So things go wrong. We actually don't let the teachers lead the innovation cycle. That's the challenge we face in today's classrooms. You're very right when you give the Tony Blair example. And I feel proud to be in India because here, Jugaad is our real strength. And the Indian mind, you may sometimes get carried away by saying has perhaps not made anything big. But if you add up what we people do and look at the way how teachers have improvised to shoot YouTubes and how tools they have used at home to actually make lessons interesting for the children which they have sent across. Yes, I agree, given a freer hand, the teachers take charge of learning. I'm a firm believer that a school culture will only thrive when teachers lead. What we have currently in a school system is we expect the principals to lead. Yes, this is the challenge. Teachers have not seen this kind of freedom, and we have to give them this kind of freedom to lead. And that's why I keep harping day in and day out, hashtag happy teachers in today's terminology. What is hashtag happy teachers? Hashtag is a teacher who does reading, writing, and research. So teacher must get time to do reading, writing, and research. It's not fair on us to say that teacher can go home and read. No, we've already burdened the teacher with enough hours. We must use our existing timetable for all the 4 S's. There must be time for everyone to do service. There must be time for everyone to do skill. There must be time for everyone to do sport. And yes, everyone has to study. That's the way timetables and curriculums have to be rejigged in schools. If I've answered your question there, Dilip.
I'll come back to that, but you always, and in your chapter of the leadership begins at top, and we referred to this earlier as a principle, right? But you talk a lot about school boards, right, and also school management committees. So would you like to share, your vision of how and what role the school board should play in your, just in the last you answered about empowering the teachers and the principals to perform. So back to you.
Absolutely. See, if you look at a company, once you appoint your CEO, you let them run the company. Do we do that with the school? I don't think we do it too often. And that's exactly why what we said, that in principle, a principal has to be the chief learning leader. It's important for the board to have a good governance structure. Great, I agree with that. Second, board should let the principal lead. I get carried away when I say that large number of our principals are subservient to the board. I agree that there has to be governance, but what is important, the principal has to be treated like a CEO of a company. Principal has to have rights, duties, and responsibilities. The governance has to be made. And I give you an example. I mean, if I may want to share that itself. When we look back the last 30 years, what Fabindia, I'm part of the Fabindia's trust. So what we did was we said, okay, we will appoint a principal, give the principal a 5-year contract and let the principal run the school. Our contract with the village school principal is 17 pages long. Everything is spelled out. And the principal knows what I have to do in the next 5 years, removed within a short span of time. And likewise, deliverables are specified. It takes a lot of hard work to reach that kind of understanding. So once that is done and the principal leads, then the principal connects with the teachers, and the whole structure works in such a way that when teachers lead the school, the principal becomes their cheerleader. That's a very simple philosophy to do things right. And you have to let individuals lead. That's most important. And in schools, this is what is never done. We don't let people lead. If you look at the school management committee model, which has been as per the right to education, it only exists on paper. We just make the school management committee and file it to CBSE or the state selection board or the state education board. This is our management committee. But does the management committee have a say in actually running the school? Yes, there must be a trust as per the Indian system of not-for-profits. The trust should only be a custodian. Trust should only be an asset manager. If you have in your corporate sector, you have an asset management company. That's what the trust should be essentially. After that, learning should go itself on its own. And the more you let people lead, the more you let them actually connect with the children and stakeholders, the better it will be. And that's where the challenge lies.
Interesting question, and it actually dovetails into the question that I was going to ask. But let me ask the question as it is coming from one of the participants. How can we inspire within, quotes, the proven, within, again, quotes, experienced teachers to think beyond results and become the emulator, the role model who can change the learner's life? In other words, how do we balance scoring high and experiential learning? And in one of your chapters, you've actually talked about the challenge of scoring. But I think if you can answer this question and also refer to that, it might be interesting.
Yeah, I would just say go play a football match with your class teacher. I have not seen too many schools where teachers actually play with the children. It's important for you to keep looking at this, that the boards today are simply for assessment. And the numbers which the boards give are absolutely flawed. There is no best method in the world to give you a fair number to measure your learning ability. And I've got a whole chapter in the book on the assessments and how they are flawed. And I've tried to explain, given examples all over the world, that people who perhaps don't get the numbers are the better people. So what we really want is that a teacher should understand, or should be able to lead you, and you should be able to connect with the teacher in terms of trust, in terms of love, in terms of simplicity. There are as many as 22 values which a teacher must experience. And those values are the ones which hold you in life. If you look at the system today, why the system is collapsing? Because the system has not created an element of trust. The system has not created an element of simplicity. The system has not really built a value system. You look back 100 years, flashback 75 years. My father was in school, and he went to a government school. He was a great student and his learning was fantastic. Now, in today's date, I can't expect those schools to offer that kind of learning system. Yes, things have changed. Education today is at a point 4.0, like some people say, after the Industrial Revolution. It's important for us to understand that with time, we must look at education as an enabler and not as a burden on the system. Currently, most of us feel education is a necessity. We don't realize that the joy of learning is part of life. Every day you pick up the phone and you start browsing, you are learning. So that shows how important learning has become to you today. And that's the important part of the whole learning cycle. Yes, I keep talking about assessments and I keep talking about boards and I keep mentioning time and again that what we need to reinvent is three things. We need to reinvent governance, we need to reinvent training, and we need to reinvent learning. We need to define learning differently. Learning is not a measurement. Learning is preparing you for life. And if you're prepared as a lifelong learner, that should be the outcome of the learning cycle in a school.
Yeah, but just to dwell on that later, that will lead me into another question, but just to take that further, if you look at how schools and educational institutions advertise themselves, right? They talk about X percentage, scoring above, let's say 95 or the toppers from here, right? And everything is focused on the class 10 or class 12 marks that you've got, right? Similarly, a college would focus on the placement or some schools actually even go to saying how many students of them have got into IIT and medicine or something. Although in your school when you were a student, you did not have the choice to take the subjects that were offered to you which you wanted to take. That's what you say in the book, because they weren't offered by your school. But how do you balance this whole thing about, and even teach parents try to look at those schools where people have scored higher percentage in, let's say, the CBSE or the ISC or whatever, or I think it is. How do you balance this, and how do you actually convey that to people? Because very difficult as a parent or someone to say, okay, I'll send my child to a school is good, but not necessarily getting high marks.
I give you a very simple anecdote. You see the hoardings which are put up. The hoardings which will say that we had so many kids in IIT, and the schools which come up in ranking of the school rankings, there's a disconnect. So if I was to look at a particular brand's highlighting of education in schools, And if I was to look at the hoardings they put up, the schools who do well in the school ranking don't actually put up the hoardings with the numbers and the IIT grads they got in or the marks they got. Those schools don't need to, because the quality of education is what matters and not the scores you get in your exam. This is a very interesting thing. I repeat, you look at the hoardings and look at the schools who put up the hoardings. On the other hand, go to the school performance indices, which are brought out by various private and government agencies. You'll possibly find the schools higher on the index are not the ones who have put up hoardings. So if you look at the best performing Kendriya Vidyalaya, they never put up a hoarding. You put up the best performing residential school, they never put up a hoarding. You put up the best global or international school, they don't need putting up a hoarding. They don't need they don't have to mention that 10 kids got 100%. It's not relevant to them. So I'm answering a question in a different way by what is facts. Yes, I agree with you to a large extent. What needs to be corrected is the scoring methodology. That needs to be corrected. It's not important for us to correct anything else. The assessment methods seem to be corrected. And currently, if you look at the last 1 year, the biggest challenge online is facing is how do you assess? So I've heard umpteen number of examples in the last 3-4 months that they're trying to do online teaching. Yes, parents are getting involved, but perhaps the definition of cheating has also changed in the last 1 year. So now we have to prepare for a new kind of paradigm. So the system and the process will always lag behind what happens on the ground. So that's where we don't have to look at assessments, but we have to look at how we fundamentally help children with the skills for life. And that's where education is important for us. So if you look at our 4S model, I keep repeating this. You so beautifully said that you need sport every day. I said, yes, you need sport every day, but perhaps one day you need 2 hours of sport. So likewise, you may have an art class in your timetable every day, but one day you may have 2 hours of art. There has to be a day in the week where you can do what you want, little more than what you can do in a normal school timetable. That's exactly what I'm referring to when I'm talking of doing service, skill, sport, and study every day. And that's the curriculum. Now, when you look at that, your whole assessment has to be addressed in a similar manner. So when we look at the My Good School methodology, we've actually been able to assess children in personal and social development. So when we went to a particular school where we changed the whole award system, we give an award for best in service, best in skill, best in sport, best in study. We also created an award for citizenship. We created so many awards for the personal attributes and the social attributes. Now, that's the way you can fundamentally change the assessment methodology. So when the parents figure out that the children who are personal and social better developed, they will over a period of time appreciate that number game is not all.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that answer. And, just to supplement, I think you mentioned about online and the parents spending more time and new definition of cheating. I mean, okay, that's one end, but I believe that the parents through online classes have got more appreciative of the teachers in the school and really seeing their challenge, what they're facing. So it's been a very interesting thing. And, maybe even when you go back to the physical world, we should compulsorily have online classes for a particular period where the parents get involved. It might change it. But there's another question from the one of the participants is saying, very happy to hear your views like all of us are and your approach. And every new approach faces a lot of resistance from conventional society or the system. Did you go through such a phase and how did you deal with such challenges?
Yeah, I will look at one particular example. Yes, the biggest resistance comes from the teachers themselves. So what happens is when we are going through a school culture reform, they are so used to doing this thing in a comfort level that they will not accept that they are given homework to read, write, and research. So I agree what you are saying, that you do find resistance, you do find challenges, but I simply say the only important thing for us is to have patience. So teaching is nothing but patience, and you have to keep going. You have to keep going relentlessly. If you look at your parents, how they got the good habits in you, or who are your better teachers, whom you emulate the most is your parents. So you have to keep going. And similarly with the teachers, you have to win a teacher one by one in the school to change the way they mentor children. So I'm looking at teachers as mentors. I'm not looking at them as content givers anymore. teacher today as a content giver is not relevant. And what Dilip, we have all been talking about what has happened in the last 1 year. Last 1 year, it's smart teachers and not smart classes that change the game. So teachers who are agile, who are willing to adapt, who are willing to learn, who are willing to do some deep thinking and design, teachers who are willing to reinvent the way they work, teachers who are willing to change themselves according to the social and cultural environment. They are the ones who will be able to help reform themselves as well as the economy around them or the entire ecosystem around them. The challenge today is teachers are stuck in a time warp sometimes, I say that. And it takes a little while because they have, I may sound sympathetic to them, but actually I'm using empathy for them, where I feel for them. I don't sympathize for them. And what teachers are stuck because teachers have not been given the wings to fly. And if we were to give the teachers the wings to fly, everything would be sorted out. Yes, the new education policy is timely. The only thing the policy will do, it emphasizes the role of a teacher as a change maker. And that's all the policy gives us. Please don't get carried away by saying that this policy will be a total panacea of all the ills. The policy will have its challenges. We all know that. But policy has done one major thing, is that it has brought teacher to the epicenter. So in your My Good School, your teacher must be the epicenter.
Okay, so, there was a follow-up question which you can quickly answer, then I'll go to another topic which I had in mind. It says the National Education Policy 2020, accords huge priority to achieving functional literacy and numeracy by all students by grade 3 as one of its core principles. Where, according to you, does India stand on this critical aspect, and what do you think needs to be done?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Now, what I really want to address and I want to harp here, we are talking of literacy and learning numeracy at the children level, but we don't have standards for teachers as yet. So if we have learning standards for teachers in place, we will be at a better position. Yes, we will manage the standards of numeracy and literacy. But before that, there's something known as standards of professional learning. And when I study the systems the world over, when I go to Finland, when I go to US, when I go to Singapore, there are standards of learning laid down for teachers. Now, I'll give you a classic example of a standard of learning. Teachers should be able to collaborate. Teachers should be able to work in pairs. Teachers should be able to generate hypothetical data from their work and their input. Teachers should use that data to design and redesigning the learning cycle. Now, till we don't address this, we will not be able to reach the numbers the new education policy is talking. Yes, we will reach the numeracy numbers which you are saying. They definitely have a scientific background, but we need to address the standards of professional learning first. And if we're able to do that, then I'm sure rest is going to be easy.
So, in your book, you actually take two examples. You take this example of the room to read and the own Fabindia policy of dear, drop everything and read. And, Sumit, who actually introduced the session, and the publications team have launched in FICCI, Roj Ek Nahi Kahani, in terms of reading. So I think that's important. But you also in your book talk about the art of writing in school, and how you can actually enable that to happen. So it'll be good if you can just quickly share what you had in mind there.
Yeah, I simply say that you need the 4 C's. My 4 C's are very simple. You first connect, then you communicate, then you collaborate, and then you create. Sorry, that's exactly the whole cycle is. So CON is connect, COM is communicate, COL is collaborate, and CREAT is create. So if you look at this hypothesis of connect and create, whether you are creating a piece of art in forms of writing or drawing or learning, it's important that the art of writing should not only be looked at as handwriting on pen and paper. Art of writing is power of expression. And art of writing could also lead to a paradigm shift if we are able to address it at the school level. Now, the challenge today is when we are encouraging people to copy and paste, we are not letting them use their mind to write and create. So why do you find a book very interesting? Why does the book run a film reel inside you when you're reading a book? Because there has been a phenomenal thought in the art of writing. And that's precisely what we need to encourage teachers. It's very simple to do. What we really do and what Dear does or what Fabindia School does, very simple. We tell the teachers that let's read the story together. And I like the way discussion around the story. When we create the discussion around the story, we tell of what they have read. When they write, we publish that. Now, when you publish something, it's like acting as a cheerleader. They see it published, they feel happy. So teacher perhaps need as much appreciation as children do. And that's where art of writing, publishing today has become very easy. So if you look at blog posts, you look at podcasts, like Dilip so beautifully said, making of YouTube videos. So many teachers have become rock stars in the last 6 months by the videos they are making. I know teachers, they are talking in blogs. Someone mentioned to me, why don't we use radio as a means of communication and to build the art of learning? I said, radio is old hat. You have to use podcasts today. Because if you say radio, it connects children with the old world. They don't want to see a radio. Now, if you look at a podcast, it's more contemporary. So art of writing does not necessarily mean physical writing with pen and paper. Art of writing, when I say art of writing, is the power of expression. And that needs to be strengthened. That is the crux of the entire learning cycle.
And then, you immediately, you after that, you talk about the annual day of the school, and then you go to, schools must provide knowledge and not mere information. So how do you, balance that? I know you have a lovely pyramid, 2 pyramids in the book, but the viewers here don't have yet access to that. But if you could share, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, see, what we say, if you look at the school calendar currently, it revolves around the annual day of a school. And in the book, very simple things are addressed. Why do you have an annual day in a school? Why do you have a school bell in a school? So books, sometimes I get carried to say, is like Meri Kahani of a school. This is a school telling you my story, that this is what happened inside me and this is what I do for you. This is what you do for me. That's what we do in the book. And Dilip, you beautifully said, how do we do that? Now, that's an important element out of it. If you look at your annual day, the annual day comprises of a child getting the opportunity to express himself or herself. Perhaps an annual day matters to a child more than a board exam also to a large extent, because that's one day where every child can be appreciated for his skill, for his service, for his sport, as well as for his study activity. So when we make a school calendar, we normally divide it into service, skill, sport, and study. We created around an ecosystem of clubs, societies, and learning organizations. We connect the school with the community and other schools. We connect the schools with schools across, and actually child learn how to collaborate with each other across schools and work on service, skill, sport, and study. The annual day is like an end goal of the year. Now, annual day is very important in the school because this is the only day when you actually get to appreciate your child beyond just marks. So that's the beauty of an annual day, where every child is appreciated. And when you appreciate every child, that's the joy of learning.
We have a minute left. So is there anything you'd like to convey before I thank you and conclude, which I have not asked you? An important message in the good school?
No. The important message in the good school is very simple. Let teachers lead. Let them be the change makers. Let them strengthen the relationship with stakeholders. That's the first message. Second, let children decide what they want to do. And please empower them, enable them to do what they want. Times have changed. We are not in the last century where we had to teach our children and be their knowledge providers or information providers. Today, a child already has the knowledge and information. He or she has to apply it. Let them apply it. So important thing for us today is, how do you define leadership? So at the school, if you look at the entire book, it focuses on leadership, leadership, and leadership. And perhaps school is the last place you think of defining as a leadership. You will define leadership as the best performing industrialist in the world. You will find leadership as a prime minister of the country. But do you define leadership as the ability of your child to be the change maker? Do you define leadership as the teacher being the biggest influencer in the child's life. That's the definition of a leadership. When that happens, schools will change.
So thank you, Sandeep, for that, those very fascinating answers to the questions that were put by the audience and also to this chat. But I was particularly struck by two parts in your book. The first one was, where you described what the Fabindia school helped teachers and students do. And you said, identify and build on their strengths, discover their leadership potential, become self-directed and collaborative learners, and becoming contributing members of their communities. That's what you put in the middle of your book around page 84. And when you conclude, you actually says the impact of a good school, right? And which you paraphrased in your last answer, but I just wanted to, because these are really the concluding words in your book, empower students by creating an environment for their personal and social development, encourages students to become involved in activities beyond just study. And this helps develop confidence, knowledge, and networks. And then finally, experiential learning is a critical factor in the students progressing successfully through adolescence, but you not actually somewhere else in the book, you talk about lifelong learning and career. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and sharing us with your vision of My Good School. And you aptly described it as, as a kind of a book which addresses every aspect of a school where, people who have invested in education, like Mr. Jaipuria was sharing with us that he's really invested, I think the first thing you talked of 1935, is it? I didn't.
1945.
1945, right? So that's even before I was born and before many of us were born. But with such people there, with experience there, I'm sure they all enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for devoting a lifetime to this space and continuing to work in this area. I do hope that you will, as you said, that you will take this and work with others.
Dilip, can I have a small question with Sandeep? I just want to take 2 minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
Sandeep, I was very much fascinated by the talk. I wanted to understand, because you've been comparing school in terms of organization to a company's organization, wherein the principal has to be given the freedom and the flexibility to run the school. Now, my question is that in a corporate, we talk about 4 mantras for a corporate to become from good to great. And I define these 4 things, mantras, is one is the data points that we have to have, because the data is the new oil. Similarly, in school structure, all the data have to be collected, gathered, refined, and then useful information has to be gathered. Second is to manage the ecosystem, because you're dealing with parents, with the teachers, with the society at large, with the government regulators, and then they have to be aligned with your vision of running the school. And the third is the agility with which we have to move forward. And that we have seen in the Corona times, how the teaching has changed and how the teachers are adapted to the new philosophy. And the fourth is the design thinking. Now, these being the 4 areas where there has to be a mindset change to convert a good organization to a great organization. Or what is your mantra for a good school to become a great school?
Yeah, you actually said, so you laid them better than the book, I would say, honestly, when you talked of data and the ecosystem. A good school is very simple, in which there is diversity, inclusion, and belonging for the children. Now, when this will only happen when a good school lets a child come to a school and not on basis of need. That's the first thing for a good school. So a school should be need blind, I sometimes say it. Then only you will get the best of children in your school. Second, once they come to the school, they must have the freedom to learn. Now I keep talking about freedom to learn. Why I keep talking about this is because the school, perhaps due to its paucity of time in the day, has to have a timetable. But within the timetable, we need to give flexibility. So we look at Rabindranath Tagore and how he created the Shanti Kunj, Shanti Niketan philosophy, and how the original schools in India who all came up before independence stood apart simply because they talked of liberal arts education. So what you're saying is right. We must have these data points. We must use the ecosystem. We must have professionalism to manage that. But we must have more experiential learning in school. That's exactly what I'm saying again and again, sir. And yes, only when you have experience will there be design. So my good school is simply Mera Acha school. It's an experience. And experience of every child is different. Experience of every teacher is different. Experience of every parent is different. So what we are now trying to build in an open platform for the world is what we call My Good School, where all the stakeholders can actually collaborate to offer the best ecosystem for the child's growth and development.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think in your section 3, which really focuses on the lessons for life, right? Section 1 of the book is in the what, why, and the how of teaching, which we've covered. Redefining education and learning, we've covered. We also covered lessons in life, with the teachers, etc. But I want to just thank you and end this session with again another quote from your book, right? Which is that when we make a decision, we have pros and cons to consider, and every moment is unique for yourself. So best you breathe easy and decide for yourself and go along the road less traveled. So I think this is a message which I like to leave with everybody. If the idea is to create a good school, currently the road less travel is well defined in Sandeep's book, My Good School, where passion meets education. So thank you very much for actually sharing this insights with all of us. And thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Jaipuria, for being with us here and chairing this session. Thank you all the participants who have joined. And I'm sure you can reach out to Sandeep for any questions. Of course, if you've not bought the book, please do buy the book. You can even get it even online, and do read it. And also do share your thoughts with Sandeep, and also if you want with FICCI, so the FICCI Arise team can take this forward. So keep safe, keep well, and thank you very much for joining. Over to you, Malika.